Welcome to another episode of Ask the Expert Panel. I'm your host, Chris Ullery, the executive editor of Bodybuilding.com, and I'm joined today by Bodybuilding.com's very own science editor, Dr. Krissy Kendall, who received her PhD in exercise physiology from the University of Oklahoma, and our honored guest, Dr. Rob Wildman, who's a PhD nutritionist, a registered dietitian, and the chief science officer for Dymatize Nutrition. Our topic today is 24-hour nutrition, or more specifically, how to structure an entire day so that you don't leave any gains on the table. I'd like to start, basically, Dr. Rob, by asking, what's the importance, or why does one need to think about nutrition in a 24-hour perspective?
Yeah, so really when you go into the gym and you train hard, you may do that for an hour or two, but it's really, and that'll create the stimulus for your body to change to get bigger, stronger, or even more enduring, depending on how you train. But it's really the hours that follow, that time outside of the gym, where nutrition will enable the changes to occur. So the exercise is a stimulus, but the nutrition is really the enabler and provides the building blocks and also just allows the transformation to happen.
That's a great point, and I know we're probably going to talk some about nutrient timing versus nutrient totals over the course of the day. But do you just want to kind of start by structuring, kind of the broad strokes of 24-hour nutrition and what people need to start thinking about first and foremost? Like, what are the kind of key concepts to hone in on initially?
Yeah, probably the biggest thing to really come to grips with right from the beginning is that when you exercise, when you train muscle hard, you put in play changes that occur within muscle, and it can occur over a 24 to 48 hour period. So how do you nourish the muscle? How do you nourish the adaptation? You just don't walk into the gym and walk out of the gym with gains, as you said. You're not going to fully maximize the benefits of the training unless you optimize the nutrition throughout that 24-hour period. And we'll talk a little bit more about that, as we move forward. But when you look at the total day, you have breakfast first thing in the morning with its own unique metabolic scenario that should be addressed. You have pre-workout, and you have during workout, and you have post-workout. And again, there are certain nutrients which can enable a better workout that we should really focus on during that time. Post-workout period is exceptionally important just because the muscle is amplified with muscle protein synthesis, and just to fully maximize the benefits, we really have to pay attention to those several hours that occur right after you train. But then there's a couple of hours after that, and then into the evening and nighttime nutrition. And we often forget about the 8 hours in which we sleep. And muscle doesn't forget, muscle doesn't sleep. It's still highly operational. So if we nourish the muscle while we sleep, it's much the same as during waking hours. Shouldn't we be looking at that 8 hour period as well as an opportunity to continue to capture those gains that you mentioned?
Yeah, I agree completely. And I think a lot of our readers get so fixated on right before and right after, and then are confused or not understanding why maybe the next time they go to the gym, they're sore, they're not recovered, they're not doing as well because maybe they got their timing pre and post perfect, but like you said, what did they do before they went to bed? What did they do first thing in the morning? And I think that's going to be some great points to hit on because we often neglect those crucial times during the day when really that's when the body adapts to the stimulus of training.
That's right. I mean, nutrient timing, you can look at it over the last few decades. And if you go back into the 1960s, 1970s, we were very focused on how to nourish muscle during training. And Gatorade was probably the earliest example of sort of applied nutrient timing to optimize performance. Optimized performance leads to better change, better endurance over time. And then, as we moved through the next few decades, we began to realize that pre-workout and post-workout were exceptionally important times for nutrient timing. So when I look at breakfast and I also look at evening as well, maybe we just look at the 24-hour period as the complete evolution or sort of the final stage of understanding nutrition in totality for somebody who trains their body to transform into a bigger, stronger machine.
So yeah, basically, to build maximum muscle, we need to sort of look at nutrition in that full 24-hour window with specific, kind of acute windows where we need to, intake certain nutrients to maximize the response, right? So let's talk about what's happening over the course of that 24 hours. And I kind of want to segue into that by just letting you guys riff on muscle protein synthesis, or the building of muscle, versus muscle protein breakdown, and what's happening throughout the day in the muscle. What does that look like? Just so we can sort of start to get an understanding of, muscle's never really at rest, as you said. So what's happening throughout the day, and what do we need to kind of begin to do to try and get toward the synthesis side of things, so that we can build more muscle.
Right. So the best place to start is really to look at muscle itself. What's the anatomy of muscle? So muscle is more than 80% protein on a dry weight basis. So if you were to take a muscle and you wring it out like you're wringing water out of a washcloth, pulling out all the water, greater than 80% of what's left over is going to be protein. So changes within muscle really reflect changes within muscle protein, which is why we're hypersensitive and we want to figure out what's happening with protein in muscle. Over the course of the day, muscle is never at rest, like you said. Muscle proteins are constantly being made and muscle proteins are constantly being broken down. It's a lot like our checking accounts, if you want to think about it that way. But, so when you train, you create a stimulus within the trained muscle, and muscle protein synthesis increases. And along with that, muscle protein breakdown increases as well. So they both increase in response to exercise. And that can last as long as 24 to 48 hours based on certain variables. So one other thing that we know is nutrition can play a role in amplifying muscle protein synthesis, primarily protein can amplify muscle protein synthesis. So you get an additive or synergistic effect of protein with exercise in trained muscle. The other thing that nutrition can do, especially protein and to a lesser degree carbohydrate or to another degree carbohydrate, is you can help minimize the amplified muscle protein breakdown. So we always have to be thinking about the two of them. And muscle protein synthesis is the more responsive side of the two. So it's the side that gets amplified the most by exercise, and it's the side that gets amplified the most by food. So that you're looking to create that imbalance. And creating that imbalance over the 24-hour period will lead to gains for that day, and gains within a day, the next day, the next day, the next day, will lead to greater gains over time.
I kind of want to continue on that gains over time, because that's obviously our goal overall, is to figure out what we can do, on a short-term, say 24-hour basis, to make gains over the course of a week or 2 weeks or month or a year. And from what you've said, obviously, diet is crucial in that. So let's talk a little bit about just the gram for gram changes required to build new muscle.
Yeah. So there's a term that I always like to throw around. It's called gram warfare. And if you think about maybe gaining 1 pound of muscle mass, so we talk in pounds, and that seems like a lot, but what does that look like on a daily basis? So if you gain 1 pound of muscle in a 1 month period of time, that's the equivalent of about 3 grams of incremental added body protein on a daily basis. So you just have to do the math. So a pound of muscle is 454 grams. Multiply that by 73%, that pulls the water out, you get about 100 grams of protein, of muscle protein, and then you divide that by 30 days in a month. So you end up with a very, very small amount of added grams of protein when you build 1 pound of muscle. But if you look at our requirements, which have steadily increased over the last few decades, thankfully, that we're finally recommending more and more protein and being less fearful of it being detrimental to other health aspects, that your base recommendations have doubled over the last couple of decades. Recommendations for somebody who trains hard are as high as 2 grams per kilogram body weight. Big difference from back in the 1980s, where we've kind of felt like 0.8 grams per kilogram body weight was still adequate for athletes.
So the main takeaway there is essentially that what we do on a daily basis, even what we consider very small actions like an extra protein shake or 2 extra protein shakes or nighttime casein, for example, those are really the actions that add up over time to enable us to build muscle. So I think I just want to emphasize that the importance here, and the whole reason we're having this conversation, is because all those little things matter, and ultimately that may be more important than, say, a single training session or a killer pump from a workout, or really it's kind of what we do over the course of a day that adds up to a month of gains.
I think so. To move towards your goal as quickly as possible, you want to optimize the potential. So the training creates the potential for change, and nutrients can help create or realize that full potential. And that's what you need to look at all day long, every day in succession.
So I think we've begun to get a good understanding of, why nutrition is essential to building muscle. But I do want to circle back a little bit because we have talked some about how a good training session is also essential. Nutrition can raise muscle protein synthesis, but really you need that awesome training session to kind of kickstart and be the stimulus to affect the change. So Krissy, do you want to talk a little bit about, the impact of training, and sort of how one builds muscle through training most effectively?
Yeah, right. And I think, we all can agree that there's got to be a stimulus in place for nutrition to have any sort of impact on muscle growth. And
so if I were to just take protein and sit on my couch, I couldn't get jacked.
Yeah, no, probably not.
Okay.
Probably not. At least we haven't found that in science yet, but there's always room for that. And I think you also have to consider you have to have a certain type of training. So are you going to get the same results if you're looking for increase in muscle mass doing one set high repetitions versus kind of more of a moderate intensity type workout versus strength? They don't all end with the same result. And so when you talk about if your goal is hypertrophy, if your goal is to increase muscle mass, we really have this sweet zone where we have the right amount of volume, the right amount of intensity, and that can lead to overall muscle growth. And so being able to structure your workout so that you're using multi-joint compound movements that really target and activate the greatest number of muscle fibers, the greatest number of muscle groups, those are going to help to get you, again, closer to your goal of hypertrophy. Also, taking into account the number of sets. We have this sweet 3 to 5, if you can get that number of sets in, and training at a pretty high intensity so that you are really reaching fatigue by the end of your 8th, 9th, or 10th rep. And you take all of that into consideration, that's what your nutrition and your supplementation is going to be able to enhance. But if you don't have that in place, you can take all the supplements you want, you can have a dialed in nutrition program, you're probably not going to see results. So it does start in the gym. And although you're only there for 1 to 2% of your day, a very small portion of that day, that's going to make a huge impact on how your body transforms. And then to add to that, that's where we see the nutrition and supplementation come into play.
That's great. I'm over here going, whew. I think it's great. I've been doing it right.
Yeah.
So
Yes.
good.
Well, just to pull in that popular phrase, you can't out-train a bad diet, right? So really what you're saying, though, is that, if you have a bad diet, you're not going to see optimal results from your training. Also, if you neglect, certain variables in your training, you're not going to see great results from your diet. So the important part is to kind of make sure these things work synergistically and go hand in hand. And that's how you're going to build muscle most effectively, right?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Right. And again, you're in the gym for a short period of time, but the recovery from that is just as important as what you're doing in the gym. So using the recovery for nutrition, for supplementation, and for rest, again, that's where you take that whole 24 hours to really maximize anything that you're working towards in the gym.
So I think we hear pretty often about people who kill one side of the equation. Mm-hmm. You have somebody who loves to go train and they might absolutely demolish their training, but then when it comes to nutrition, they don't eat very strategically, or they eat, the seafood diet, seafood, eat it, whatever I want. What would you say to those people to help them kind of maximize both sides, to get the best possible result?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I'll say that, it's interesting because someone will go to the gym with either in their phone or in their journal, and they will have the sets listed, the reps listed, the weights they're going to use, the order of exercises, but they don't carry that over to their diet, to their meal plan. So why not take that same sort of structure and say, this is what I'm going to have my first set for breakfast, and then for lunch and for dinner, and what snacks I'm going to have in between. If you're going to dial in so that you have every exercise listed for your training, take that same principle, strategy, and use that for your diet, and then follow it. And it does take planning, but so does when you plan your workout. And it's going to save you time in the long run, because you're not going to have to be thinking on your feet. You're not going to have to be searching around, running to the store. You've got your meals ready to go. And so you've got to carry that over, not just from the gym and not just from your diet, but to use it hand in hand together.
Yeah, I can't tell you how many times, because I'm very nosy when I go to the gym. I like to just walk up to people and ask if I can look in their journal, or hey, what's in your shaker cup, or because every day is a learning opportunity for me. And a lot of times what you do see is overemphasis on the training itself, and maybe not enough emphasis on the nutrition side. And then sometimes you can see it the other way around as well. But I think Dr. Kendall, the good doctor there, just completely nailed something, that the consistencies between core training concepts, frequency, volume, intensity, and so forth, that you can almost transition over into nutrition as well, almost nutrition training, the frequency of meals, the intensity of certain nutrients, the volume over the course of a day. A lot of these same concepts apply to nutrition as they do to training, and there's a complete marriage there. I think for a lot of times people go to one side or the other, whether it's the training side or the nutrition side, and they go very deep, and they probably go deeper, sweat smaller details, instead of staying a little bit more general on both sides and then going deeper, sort of in parallel. So really, you have to emphasize both sides in order to optimize the potential that's coming out of your gains.
To use a popular phrase, you also hear people say, oh, diet is 80% of your results, or, abs are made in the kitchen, etc. But it sounds like, and let me know if this is the case, that really it requires both, and you might even say 50-50 to make the right changes, the changes that you want.
Yeah, and they have to line up. So if your goal is to increase muscle mass and you're also trying to drop 20 pounds, you're going to struggle with that. And you're probably going to fall short either in the training because you're not fueling yourself well enough to make it through your training sessions, or you are going to come short up on your diet because it's not matching the goals. And I think, Dr. Rob, you probably see this as well. They've got to line up. And you've got to fuel for your workouts, and you need your workouts to reflect what you're eating. If you're eating too much and not working out hard enough, even if your diet is exactly how you tracked it and your workouts exactly how you tracked it, when they're not matched, it's going to be very difficult to come across the goals that you want to see. So taking that into account as well.
Yeah, I think the good doctor just nailed it right there. and that scenario is probably the most common scenario that we deal with, and that's people who are looking to gain muscle mass, increase muscularity, but at the same time increase body leanness, so to lose body fat. So to build and lose simultaneously requires a marriage and a synergy between growth resulting from resistance training and then limitation or reduction that would result from proper dietary structure. It's really the two that go hand in hand. I do want to make the point about the 80% diets, and sometimes people say things and I'm not sure what the origin of the meaning is, but maybe that just reflects the timing piece of it as well. Mm-hmm. That the gym, you may only spend 15, 20% of your day, if you're really in there for a couple of hours, and the other 80% is really, nutrition oriented, more of a nutrition. So maybe that's where the 80% comes from. But I don't see how you can overemphasize the nutrition side and even sort of discredit the training side and limit it to only 20% of, the potential.
And I think you guys bring up another important point that we haven't touched on quite yet in this conversation, the importance of setting a goal. And I think we can probably agree that that's something a lot of people skip. They get excited around New Year's and maybe start hitting the gym, and they're not quite sure what strategies to use. And without that clear defined goal initially, it's obviously hard to know how to train and then how to eat, to move forward. So thus far, we've really figured out you have to have a clear goal in mind, and it has to be, I think, an achievable, realistic goal. Mm-hmm. You need a really solid, well-structured training program to create the proper stimulus. And then the rest of the day, you have to focus on, small behaviors and actions you can take to build muscle over time. So I think now that we have the broad strokes down, of the importance of 24-hour nutrition, the importance of training in that 24 hours and having a goal and having all the structure, I kind of want to walk through what the perfect day looks like. Mm-hmm. I want to build muscle. What should I do throughout the day to make that possible as most effective as possible? So let's say we've got a 190-pound guy. Okay. First and foremost, how many calories should he eat to kind of begin the process?
Yeah, so I think the first thing, the caloric determination, as Dr. Kendall said, determining calories and then logging that in their journal, their notebook, just so that they can create their own profile. So if they're trying to gain weight, lose weight, or maintain weight and just manipulate body composition, that'll be a factor. But let's just assume that this individual is looking to maybe build a little bit of muscle while simultaneously lose a little bit of body fat. So body weight will generally stay about the same, and we're going to target a calorie level that's appropriate for sort of weight maintenance. For that individual, I mean, there are numerous tools that are available on Bodybuilding.com that apply simple equations like Mifflin-St. Jean or Harris-Benedict or whatever that will help that individual calculate those calories. But it should be, for that individual, it's probably somewhere around 3,000 to 3,200 calories a day, and that's a great starting point.
And I will say, even with the tools that we have, they are estimations. And I think that's something a lot of people, they get so fixated on a number and they will say, well, I'm eating the exact calories this equation told me. They're estimations, and a lot of factors can go into play. Do you have a 9-to-5 desk job? If that's the case, you're probably considered low activity level. Even though you go to the gym every day, you're still considered low. Do you have a more hands-on, labor-intensive job? Well, that's going to, again, play a role in how many calories you consume on a day. So one thing that I do recommend to individuals, once they get that base calorie from a calculator, is to monitor their weight for the first week or so. And if they're following the calories and tracking their diet and their weight's not adjusting how it should be, either they're losing weight too fast or they're gaining weight, then make small adjustments from there. But don't become so fixated on this one number and not be willing to make and fine tune with adjustments on that.
Yeah, it's a great starting point, but everybody is different. You want to make sure that you're customizing this 24-hour period, this nutrition intake, specific to you.
Step one, establish a pretty good baseline. Maybe take a week to refine from there. So log your nutrition, track everything for a little bit, find your own kind of numbers. What's step two? Is it figuring out, then the percentages or how much protein one should eat, versus carbs and fat? Where do you go after you've got, your basic calorie outline kind of figured out?
Yeah, in my view, step two is determination of minimum protein needs. So, we know that when people train, there's stimulus for their body to accumulate more muscle mass, and that requires more protein. So recommendations go as high as 2 grams per kilogram body weight by the ISSN. A lot of people recommend 1 gram per pound of sort of a lean body mass target. Or somewhere between 20 and 25% of your calories coming from protein. But it all kind of gets you into kind of a similar protein area. So for our 190, 195 pound guy, he's somewhere maybe around 190, 200 grams of protein targeting for that day. And that's a good base. For 3,200 calories, then, that's probably around 24, 25% of his caloric intake. And again, that's a good solid recommendation for a good protein target.
Figuring out your protein first is key because there are a lot of different diets out there. If it's a 40-40-20, if it's a higher fat, low carb, if it's a high carb, low fat, moderate protein, it can get overwhelming. And then you're trying to play around with a bunch of numbers and it's just complicating. And the more complicated you get, the chances are you're gonna fail at what you do and you're gonna give up pretty quickly. So I agree that figure out your protein first. Then from there, with what's remaining, your calories that are remaining, calculate your carbohydrates and then your fat to come up with what works best for you. And what works best for you is not gonna work best for everyone else. We're all on different diet plans here. We probably follow the very similar ranges for protein, carbs, and fats, but I can guarantee my numbers don't look like your numbers, and they shouldn't, because goals and body size are different, and then therefore diet plans are different.
Yeah, and I'll just add one more piece to that because I think that's just spot on. That, I think what we're really understanding at this point is if you get your energy intake right around where it should be for your body weight goals, and you identify and you implement on the right protein level as a minimum, the amount of fat and carbohydrate, and really factoring out getting, healthier carb sources, healthier fat sources, but really energy carb and energy fat, can almost slide back and forth, against one another, so that it allows the opportunity for people to sort of customize the non-protein calorie contributors over the course of the day, maybe specific to the type of training that they're doing, where they may want more carbohydrate if they're doing maybe more high intensity interval training, maybe throwing in a little bit of extra aerobic activity as well at a higher intensity, or if they're trying to manipulate their carbohydrate intake to adjust blood glucose a little bit better. It just gives them enough variability there so that they can customize and be more successful.
So calories first, protein minimum second, but you guys have both said minimum, and so I did want to talk just briefly about what about this 195-pound guy wants to eat 30% from protein? Is that problematic, and are there benefits to it?
Well, I'll start, but there are a lot of great benefits of protein. So you can look at it from really both sides. What does the extra protein get you? And then if you add extra protein, you're actually pulling out other energy contributors. So what does the removal of the extra fat and extra carbohydrate, does that add benefit? So you really have to look at both sides. But protein's a fantastic nutrient, and beyond stimulating and promoting changes within muscle, it's also very satiating, and it's also thermogenic. So it can help you control hunger, and then it can also help keep your metabolism higher over the course of the day. When you look at carbohydrate and fat and protein, typically protein results in greater energy expenditure just from the processing of it. And so you can use it strategically. And then I think that dovetails into a next question, is whether or not that's problematic. Are higher protein diets detrimental to health? And I think one thing that we've really come to realize over the last few decades, after some really early scares around renal failure and leaching calcium from bones and early osteoporosis and so forth, it's just not really the case. Higher protein intakes tend to be safe as long as there's no additional medical circumstances that need to be addressed.
Yeah, agree. Spot on that there's very little, if any, research to suggest that even 4, 5, 6 times what the RDA recommends as far as protein intake has any sort of negative effect on your health and organ function. But with that being said, we also know that there may not be such this great added benefit when you start to go very high protein. Is it necessarily bad? Probably not. But if you're compromising intake of carbohydrates and fats, which also serve a very important role in your body as well as for performance, you have to take a little bit of that into consideration.
Yeah, there's so many fantastic benefits to carbohydrate sources and fat sources, the fat coming from fish or olive oil or even vegetables and so forth. I hate to think about the idea of purposely reducing the input of very nutritious sources of carbohydrate and of certain highly functional fats from our diet because we're trying to get more protein. We're all, just trying to become more fit, have a little bit more muscle, a little less body fat, but at the end of the day, we need to be healthy as well. So there's a whole lot of other stuff in our body beyond skeletal muscle. So we want to make sure that we're properly nourishing that tissue as well so that, we can be as healthy as we can be at this point in our life, because that sets us up for longitudinal health throughout the rest of our lives as well.
So we've set up kind of your first steps, caloric intake, minimum protein intake, 20 to 25%, could go above, but then kind of customize your fuel source, fat or carbs, whichever you prefer. So let's start kind of wrapping that in terms of a day. And I kind of want to say this 195-pound guy works a 9-to-5 job, like a lot of us. He probably has to train in the evening, so maybe he gets up around 7 a.m. So before work, just got up, 7 a.m., what's the breakfast look like?
Well, the meal, you have to think about where you're coming out of. And where you're coming out of is overnight. So during the overnight period, going back to muscle has slipped into a negative net muscle balance. Muscle protein synthesis has fallen below muscle protein breakdown. So at this point, you're not moving towards your goal, at least in theory. So you want to sort of right that course as quickly as possible. So morning protein is absolutely ideal. So if you go back and you think about, your total grams of protein target for the course of the day, and let's just say it's 1 gram per pound of body weight. So it's right around 200 grams for our individual. So if you portion that down into maybe 4 meals, 4 big meals, starting with breakfast, that's going to get you around 40 to 50 grams of protein first thing in the morning, if you portion your food that way over the course of the day. So 40 to 50 grams of protein, and then carbohydrate will, at least, 1-to-1, maybe a 2-to-1 for that as well. So you may have anywhere between 50 and 100 grams of carbohydrate in there. And then fat is a little less of that just because of the caloric density, maybe about 10 to 20 grams of fat. So it's a pretty sizable meal, but it's in proportion if your meals are about the same caloric density over the course of the day with this 195-pound guy.
And something, maybe we can discuss a little bit is, what does that look like? Because I know sometimes people might think 40 to 50 grams of protein, does that mean I have to take 3 protein shakes in the morning? Or what does 80 grams of carbohydrates look like for a morning meal? Is that a couple pieces of toast with some juice? Can the protein, are we talking, 4 or 5 eggs and then maybe some turkey bacon to get the fat and protein back in there? So, kind of, do y'all have any sort of like what your typical 40 grams of protein looks like, or 50 or 60 grams of carbs, or what that kind of looks like, or how you could tell someone maybe to estimate?
Well, luckily, we're here at Bodybuilding.com, the fittest place on the planet, so loaded with all kinds of information as far as making foods, making recipes, meals, meal plans, and so forth, really providing a lot of guidance there. But one thing that you have to remember, because sometimes we talk a little too much in macronutrients and not enough in foods. So if you think about eggs, for example, I love eggs for breakfast. So if an egg itself may be 6 to 7 grams of protein, plus it may be matched with sort of an equal number of grams of fat as well. So you're getting fat with your eggs. Some people will like to do a 50-50 whole eggs to egg whites, something like that. And it's just a nice way to try to manipulate the fat content of that. Dairy foods first thing in the morning, yogurts or milk. Milk, if you want to simplify milk, it's it's about 120 calories for skim milk. It's 1 gram of protein per ounce, 1.5 grams of carbohydrate per ounce. So a lot of the foods that are associated with breakfast can begin to gobble up those macronutrient contributions pretty fast.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to think about it in terms of, because very few foods seem to fall into single macronutrient categories, and so that is one nice and easy way to structure it, is you could say, okay, egg whites, say 4 grams of protein per egg white. Okay, well then I could have 10 egg whites, a couple eggs, and start to fill in that category. The whole oats may have a little bit of fat, but if we think about that primarily as carbs, a cup of oats. And we can definitely provide some links and recommendations. But yeah, that's a very good point, is the numbers are clean, sure, but foods often fall into different categories.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, you start throwing in maybe 16 to 20 ounces of milk in there, and all of a sudden you're adding additional carbohydrates, some fruit first thing in the morning, because a lot of people love fruit first thing in the morning, cantaloupe, strawberries, whatever it may be. So really, getting there with whole foods first thing in the morning is, it's easy to do if you are the type of person who is going to make that morning meal. And then a lot of other people will then sort of slide over and make smoothies and whatnot to try to fill some of those nutritional targets, but do it in less volume. And maybe do it in a way that's maybe a little bit on the go for them as well.
That's perfect. So I think we've also begun to establish with breakfast kind of the equal distribution of nutrients that we're talking about. So, protein with every meal, probably some carbs with most meals, maybe a bigger emphasis on post-workout carbs. So we hit our 7 a.m. meal. What's kind of the timing for the next meal? When should that occur? And even throughout the day until we kind of get closer to the workout?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of factors that come into play here. One, if you're continuing to focus on muscle, at what point is the delivery of amino acids from the previous meal, at what point do they begin to taper down? So that may be about 3 to 4 hours afterwards. Also, if you eat a fairly sizable meal, you may be dealing with hunger issues as well, or in a certain lifestyle, you may be dealing with breakfast, lunch, dinner. So luckily, if you have a sizable meal like breakfast, like we just mentioned, the next meal probably should fall somewhere between 11, 12 o'clock, maybe 12:30.
Yeah, and it's, again, people will sometimes fixate on a number. And if you're hungry in 2 hours, then, by all means, eat something. We're looking at a 24-hour picture. And so kind of figuring out what is the best way to reach your protein goals, your carb goals, and your fat in a full 24-hour period. If it's, a 2-hour meal or 2 hours after your breakfast, if it's 3 hours, if it's 4 hours, paying attention to that. And then again, considering when your workout is going to be. So now if we're getting closer to the afternoon, things you do have to start considering, those few hours before your workout are what's my protein going to be, what are my carbs going to be, and playing around with some of those numbers as well.
Yeah.
And then, so between, say, the 7 and 11 a.m. meals, is there any reason to take amino acids in there? A lot of people do, especially around here, we have an amino acid fountain.
Yeah, no,
a lot of people drink aminos between meals. Is there anything, to bridge those two meals that people should worry about? Or, is it okay to just go with that time period?
I weigh in for a couple of different reasons on essential amino acids or branched chain amino acids in between meals. One reason might be that you're assuring the flow of essential or branched chain amino acids to the muscle during that time, and maybe just absolutely assuring that you're maximizing the stimulus on muscle and providing all the amino acids to allow muscle protein synthesis to happen at its optimal rate. Mm-hmm. So there's an assurance factor there when it comes to muscle and muscle protein synthesis. And then the other part of it is, there is benefit to branched chain amino acids as in supplemental form throughout the day to aid in recovery as well. So you may train muscle, 2 or 3 times a week, you train it hard, but then you're going to come back and train it again a couple of days, later. Recovery is really important. So to, ease the comfort of the muscle within as short a time as possible, to reduce inflammation, to reduce markers of muscle damage and so forth. So supplementation in between those meals may provide additional benefit.
Could help. So.
Yeah, I was going to say, there's not a whole lot of research to suggest if your diet is providing enough protein and essential amino acids that having additional BCAAs throughout the day would enhance muscle growth. But there is research to suggest that it will help to reduce muscle soreness and things along those lines. Plus, I think BCAAs taste great, which we can all agree with. And, it's great for someone, too, who it will help to kind of keep you satiated between meals. And that's something that I often tell people as well, keep you hydrated because you're drinking fluids, and keep you from snacking and picking on things that you probably shouldn't be eating based on what your goals are. Yeah. So a couple of different benefits with them.
Okay, so you don't necessarily need to micromanage it. You don't need to, think it's going to make or break it, but it could help. So, do it if you prefer.
Yeah, and I think, different scenarios could apply. So we're talking about a well-nourished 195-pound guy, but there are a lot of people that will restrict calories as well. And they'll also restrict food volume. And there's a lot of people that won't eat first thing in the morning and so forth. So we're describing this ideal pie in the sky scenario, but from there's a lot of customization that takes place. And certainly there's a lot of people that subscribe, and myself included, that subscribe to the idea that more fuel carbohydrate first thing in the morning and post-workout allows you to distribute carbohydrate a little bit heavier in 2 separate occasions. One in the morning because more of it can go into the liver to replenish liver glycogen stores, and then post-exercise because the muscle is wide open for accepting that carbohydrate to rebuild glycogen stores that were depleted during strenuous training.
So let's move toward that kind of pre-intra, post-workout window, because I think we can assume our lunch looks pretty similar to breakfast, right? We have, somewhere 40 to 60 grams of protein, probably some carbs and a little fat, so good balanced, macronutrient composition. But what about when you get close to the workout, got off work at 5 p.m., I'm going to train at 6. What do I really need to start thinking about pre, maybe intra, and then post?
Yeah, when it comes to pre-workout, the things that people are really looking for, the benefits. One, they want to feel invigorated. They want to feel energized. The other factors that will really help with an acute workout could be enhanced circulation. So you definitely want those 2 factors in a pre-workout. You want some type of caffeine source unless you're heavily caffeinated throughout your workday. But you want that energy support. Plus, you want some circulation support that's maybe coming from a citrulline, or maybe coming from beetroot or pomegranate extract.
Yeah, agree. And for someone with a later workout, there are non-stim type products, again, that contain the beetroot extract, the pomegranate, that's going to help to open up your blood vessels, get more blood pumping to your muscle, and at least give your body the nutrients that it needs without the caffeine, without a whole bunch of stimulatory effects, but still going to power you through your workout for that.
Yeah, other factors you may find in a pre-workout include some of the muscle aminos, as I like to call them. So your beta-alanines and your branched-chain amino acids and your creatine. It's a great time to get a lot of those nutrients into the muscle because blood flow to that muscle is enhanced during exercise and they're taken up. So while you may not have an acute effect with the creatine, it allows for creatine to accumulate over weeks so that the muscle gets stronger and more powerful during high intensity reps. Then the beta-alanine may have an experiential effect. So some people want that sort of tingle that you can get from beta-alanine and have that sort of acute effect. But also beta-alanine can be converted to carnosine, and then or carnosine, which is a muscle buffering tool that over time will help muscle deal with some of the metabolic waste that happens during high intensity exercise. So you can find some of these muscle aminos, including branched chain amino acids, which may help in recovery as well. You'll also find them in a pre-workout.
Yeah, and I just want to touch on one thing that you brought up was, although a lot of pre-workouts will have things like creatine or beta-alanine, keep in mind that there is not going to be an immediate effect to what they can do for your body. And I get that question a lot. Should I take it pre-workout, post-workout? I tell people, whenever you can remember. So if you always take a pre-workout drink, or if your pre-workout already has creatine, beta-alanine, then take it then. But keep in mind, to really get the full benefits of those, you're going to have to be consistent for 4 weeks, 5 weeks to really maximize. But for an immediate response, look for things like caffeine in any of your NO boosters that you get in pre-workouts.
So we kind of want a combination of short-term nutrients that are going to have an immediate effect, like a stimulant, say, or something to increase blood flow, plus a good time to take our longer-term nutrients like creatine, beta-alanine, stuff that will enhance performance over time. And I think that's something we can provide doses on the page for, so that if you're getting some in your pre-workout, you also know how much total throughout the day you should look for. And if you've done that and you've had a couple meals before, like our guy, what about during the workout? Is there something ideal to sip on, and then even following that right into the post-workout window?
I'll start this one. I like to sip on BCAAs, mainly because it helps to keep me hydrated. And I think that's a big thing, that even if your workouts are only an hour long, people underestimate how much fluid they lose, whether that's, if they're a heavy sweater, if they're a salty sweater, things like that. So having something to sip on like BCAAs, because the flavors taste good, it makes me want to keep drinking, and it's going to help me to stay hydrated. I'm not a huge fan of going heavy carbs or having something with a lot of carbs, but that's because most of my workouts fall between 45 and 60 minutes, and I would rather just save my carbs post-workout and handle them there. So I think anything that can keep you hydrated during your workout is something important. I will always have a water bottle with me at the gym, but plain old water will also help keep you hydrated. It doesn't have to be fancy and have a bunch of things in it to serve its purpose and prevent you from dehydration, which can affect performance, which can cause or increase the chances of cramping and things like that while you work out.
Yeah, good old-fashioned body H2O.
Yeah.
There's been some research done in the past that suggests that people going into an exercise session can be partially dehydrated. So depending on the degree of dehydration, you may not get your best workout in. So ensuring good hydration status before as well as during can help you optimize that workout. Absolutely.
Perfect. And then post-workout, especially we're talking about hypertrophy. So I've just, crushed it for an hour, several sets, maybe it's a body part split. What do I need to kind of maximize the response from training?
Yeah, so in the post-workout period, where muscle is the most responsive and muscle protein synthesis is at its highest, it's also going to respond the best to protein. So if you ate a big meal prior to going in, maybe an hour or so before, and you trained for maybe an hour while you're at the gym, you still have the residual effects. You still have amino acids flowing into the muscle. So you may have the muscle full. You may have the benefits of that protein. The big question is, what's going to happen over the next few hours, and how closely do you need to time that next meal so that the amino acids don't go down and you're still in that post-workout period, which can last a few hours, where it's still amplified and then wanes over time. How do you maximize that? How soon do you need protein after that in order to keep that as high as possible?
Yeah, and when I get asked, do I need to eat all my protein and carbs within an hour post-workout? And a few years ago, I would have said, yes, that's your anabolic window. If you miss that window, there goes your gains, and you throw your workout in the toilet because it's not going to do anything. But as Dr. Rob said, it really comes down to, when was your last meal? If you had a big meal or you ate carbs and protein right before you worked out, that 45 minutes post-workout is not do or die. You will be okay if you go home, take a shower, and then prep your meal. You can eat whole foods. If you don't want to have a protein shake post-workout and you would rather cook yourself something, then do that. You have a little bit more flexibility. Ideally, the closer you can time that with your workout, when your muscles are more adaptive to it and are going to take in what you feed it, the better. But it's not a complete waste if you take an hour after your workout. I will say the only time I really emphasize that post-workout window, about an hour after your workout, is if you have multiple workouts. So there's a lot of people who do morning workouts, evening workouts. If they're in competition, if they're prepping for something, then it becomes, in my opinion, that much more important that you are timing a little bit closer to your workouts, especially post-workout, and getting your nutrients into the muscle so that they can be digested, absorbed, and ready to go for your next workout. Versus if you have 24 hours before your next workout, you have a little bit more flexibility, a little bit more freedom with what and when you eat right after your workout.
Yeah, great.
Yeah, so the real consideration then is, how much protein do you have going into the workout? If you're fairly low there, it sounds like it won't kill you if you wait a little while, but probably won't hurt and could be beneficial if you do have a protein shake or a meal. And do you want that to be a mix of protein and carbohydrates post-workout?
It really depends on what your goal is. So if you're the carbohydrate has its own unique benefits. It can help minimize the muscle protein breakdown that's being stimulated during the training due to insulin, but also it'll help you recover your energy stores that you just reduced during that hard training session. Some people believe that that'll help volumize muscle, help rehydrate that, help hold water within the muscle tissue. But there's benefit to it to recharge that that muscle with carbohydrate and rebuild those stores immediately after.
Keep in mind that protein can have an insulin response as well. Mm-hmm. So depending on what your personal macronutrient goals are, keep that in mind. And that just because someone has 50 grams of carbs post-workout, that doesn't necessarily mean you need to have 50 grams of carbs. You will have an insulin response from protein, which will help to shuttle in nutrients. Also, the other thing that I hear a lot of is people saying, eat gummy bears and candy post-workout, which is fine. You will get an insulin response from that, and it'll be a quick, rapid one, which will help to drive in nutrients. But you can also have more of our nutrient-dense whole grain carbohydrates that will also deliver the same overall goal that you want to achieve. So if you are going to have a cheat snack, fine, do it then, but know that you don't have to have Skittles post-workout every time.
But you could.
But you could.
Taste the rainbow.
Protein gummy bears.
Yes.
I like it.
So we hammered the workout. Last thing I want to touch on is what to do at night then. Let's say the dinner's about the same as our other meals, but what should I consider before going to bed?
Well, I will always recommend having protein before bed, and specifically casein before bed, because there is a great deal of research, recent research, that suggests having a slow digesting protein like casein is not only great for helping to maintain a positive protein balance or to stimulate protein synthesis while you're resting, sleeping, not doing anything, but can even improve body composition.
Yeah, it's been the forgotten 8 hours. So if you want to look at a 24-hour nutrition strategy, you can't leave it behind. We know that while you sleep, protein is digested and absorbed the same as if you're awake. We also know that the muscle is as responsive to protein, an anabolic response while you sleep, just like you're awake. Why not take advantage of that? If you're trying to create a net positive muscle protein balance over a 24-hour period, why go negative while you theoretically, why go negative while you sleep and then have to climb out of a hole first thing in the morning? So, there's good theoretical reason why to do it. And then as Dr. Kendall said, I mean, it makes perfect sense too, beyond stimulating muscle protein synthesis. It raises calorie expenditure while you sleep. Studies show that resting energy expenditure is increased in the morning, after casein or other proteins right before bed. Casein also may help control appetite first thing in the morning, reduced hunger perception first thing in the morning. All these things are extra benefits, when it comes to casein. One other thing that I think is really, really interesting is that recommendations have gone on for way too long about not eating later in the day. For our population who's trying to build muscle and create a greater, leaner body, I think it's a matter of smart nutrition right before you go to bed. Casein, there's been studies now that are suggesting that casein at night, probably because of its slow digestion and because it doesn't have a strong insulinotropic effect, it doesn't raise insulin, so it's not going to impede fat breakdown from fat tissue and fat burning in tissue like muscle. So there's been some data now that's been suggestive that when you wake up first thing in the morning, that you are burning fat at the same rate as if you went to bed on an empty stomach. So the idea of I don't want to eat before bedtime because I don't want to disrupt the 8 hours a day where I'm just a fat burning machine, it seems like you can probably get away with protein and more specifically at least casein right before bedtime.
Yeah, 100%. Nailed it, yeah.
Well, just as a last recommendation, obviously you can get casein in a shake, which is an easy way to do it.
Yeah.
But what about other foods you might eat before bed that are going to be predominantly casein?
Yeah, I think yogurt, making casein pudding, things like that. We have some great recipes on our website that are strictly for casein based meals, mug cakes that you can make with casein protein powder. I mean, I keep it simple and just do casein, which if you haven't had casein, it creates a thicker, kind of a very smooth texture. So it's great for kind of smoothies that then turn more like milkshakes. So it's the ideal right before you go to bed type of meal to have.
Yeah, and the old thought of, glass of milk right before bed. Let's not forget, you're going to get a little extra carbohydrate with that if you have skim milk, but milk protein is 80% casein. So, that old wives' tale or whatever it is, maybe there's something to it. But, I like to go old school as well and just hit it with a little cottage cheese if I want food over shake.
Yes, yeah.
Perfect. Well, thank you guys. This has been an extremely informative hour. I think just an attempt at a summary here is that, your 24-hour total period is probably the most important thing. You don't necessarily need to micromanage every specific time, though you should pay special consideration to breakfast, pre, intra, post workout, and probably nighttime. And then as far as how you structure that throughout your day, establish your total calories,
Yes.
hit that minimum protein, and then figure out how you want to fill up your other fuel sources and how you want to distribute it.
Yeah, there's so many great learning opportunities there. So if you track what you do and find your successes, that'll help create sustainability in what you're doing.
Yeah, tracking and being consistent You know, it's going to take time before you can, without measuring everything and without logging it into your journal, be able to say, okay, I've hit my 40 grams of protein here, I've hit my 80 grams of carbs here. So just be consistent, give it time, and be patient with the whole process.
Yeah, and keep coming back to Bodybuilding.com for more information on this topic and others.
Well, you had a great point. I did want to reiterate too, because I forgot about it. Obviously, the workout is critical. So, integral to all the other parts of the 24-hour nutrition window. Crush your workout, plan it, structure it, and if you're going to put that much detail into the workout, do the same with your nutrition so they go
Well
hand in
said.
hand.
Beautifully said.
Thanks for tuning in to our 24-hour nutrition episode of The Expert Panel. A huge thank you to our science editor, Dr. Krissy Kendall, and of course to our special guest, Dr. Rob Wildman. For more great content from both of these authors, check out Bodybuilding.com. They each have a series of fantastic articles, and we have a few other expert panels available as well. And for more great content and information like this, keep coming back to Bodybuilding.com.